Arratsaldeon, jaun Andreok. Zientziarekin eta hitzekin hasi aurretik, arte pixka bat, dantza eta musika pixka bat, Arkaitz Miner, biolinean, Jon Maia dantzan, Kukai Dantzatikan. A little suite of traditional Basque dance and music. Eskerrik asko, enjoy it. Arkaitz, prest? Jauzi.
Jaun-Andreok, arratsaldeon.
Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidas y bienvenidos a la inauguración del Festival Passion for Knowledge 2023.
Eskerrik asko guztioi hemen izateagatik. Eta Donostia International Physics Centerren izenean, ongi etorri Passion for Knowledge zientzia jaialdiaren edizio berri honetara.
Un festival que comienza tendiendo puentes entre diferentes disciplinas de la cultura y en el que hemos podido disfrutar de la maravillosa actuación de Kukai Dantza.
Datozen egunotan, punta-puntako zientzilarien hitzaldiak entzuteko aukera izango dugu. Hemen, Victoria Eugenian, egingo diren hitzaldi nagusietan. Eta gu bioi aurkezle lanak egitea egokitu zaigu.
Bai, eta gure buruak aurkezten hasiko gara, ezta? Tengo a mi lado al físico Javier Aizpurua, Premio Euskadi de Investigación 2022, profesor investigador del Centro de Física de Materiales y miembro del Donostia International Physics Centre.
Y a mi lado, a Laitz Ochoa de Eribe, que es divulgadora científica de Eluyar y periodista del programa de ITB Tecnópolis.
Pasaden astean, oholtza honetan bertan izan ditugu Donostiako zinemaldira etorri diren nazioarteko zine izarrak. Eta aste honetan berriz, zientziaren izarrak izango ditugu haien jakintzarekiko grina gurekin partekatzen. So, welcome to Donostia and thank you for sharing your passion for knowledge.
Honen bestez, ekitaldiekin astera goaz. Eta Donostiako alkate jaunaren agurra entzungo dugu, lehendabizi, Eneko Goia jauna, zurea da hitza.
Lehendakaria, aldu nagusia, sailburuak, erretoreak eta DIPC-ko lagunak, presidentea, arratsaldeon eta ongi etorriak guztiok Donostiara. Poza handia da, aurten berriz ere oso gurea daukagun zientziaren aste honi harrera egin ahal izatea. Zinemaldiaren argi eta dizdira hitzaldi berri zaizkigu eta laster sukaldaritzari egingo diogu tartea. Eta zinemaldia eta gastronomikaren artean, hementxe dugu zientziaren astea. Hementxe da Passion for Knowledge. I want to welcome all the guests who have come to San Sebastian to participate in this festival. We just finished the International Film Festival, and next week we'll celebrate an International Gastronomy Congress. And between both events that place our city in the world, we have this other event, which also places us in the world. Because in San Sebastian, we have passion for many things, and we have a passion for knowledge. Nuestra ciudad es conocida por muchas cosas. Nuestras playas, nuestra calidad de vida, nuestra cocina. Pero quiero reivindicar que cada vez somos más conocidos por la capacidad de atraer talento y generar iniciativas vinculadas al conocimiento. Donostia es una ciudad de ciencia y de conocimiento, y lo digo con humildad, pero también con orgullo. Y como bien dice Echenique, es también una ciudad en la que la ciencia está en la propia ciudad. En nuestra ciudad existen proyectos que están siendo reconocidos internacionalmente, en el ámbito biosanitario, en las nanociencias, el diseño industrial avanzado. No es casualidad que durante los próximos meses vayamos a terminar la construcción del edificio que albergará uno de los 6 ordenadores cuánticos que existen en el mundo. Ese ordenador va a estar aquí, en Donostia, en San Sebastián, gracias al Gobierno vasco y a la Universidad del País Vasco, y también a la Diputación Foral de Guipúzcoa. Creo que es un dato significativo, que indica que en esta ciudad existe un sustrato científico de primer nivel. Estoy convencido de que va a ser una herramienta muy potente, que va a ayudar a muchos investigadores a avanzar en sus proyectos. El Donostia International Physics Centre es nuestro buque insignia y Pedro Miguel Echenique, su almirante. Gracias a vuestro trabajo, Pedro Miguel, nuestra ciudad es referencia y lugar de paso de las estrellas del firmamento científico. Hacéis una labor increíble, no solo en la investigación que realizáis, también, como no, en la divulgación de vuestro trabajo, y esto es importante, hoy más que nunca. Estoy seguro de que alguno de los referentes del futuro habrá sentido la llamada gracias a vuestra idea de difundir y encender la curiosidad. Este año jugamos en la Champions League, y no solo en el fútbol. Donostia plays Champions League, but not only thanks to Real Sociedad, our local soccer team. Donostia plays Champions League in science and knowledge. Some of the best and the brightest minds are joining us this week. And we are very proud of that. Munduko hirien norgehiagoka gogorra da. Guztiok nahi dugu gure burua atera eta leku bat egin nazioarteko estenan. Gaur bezalako egunetan, sinistuta nago, Donostiak baduela toki propio bat hiriko mundu garrantzitsuenen artean. Oraingoan, zientzia eta ezagutzari esker. Eskerrik asko guztioi.
Eskerrik asko, alkate jauna. Jarraian, Gipuzkoako diputatu nagusiaren hitzak izango ditugu entzungai. Eider Mendoza Andrea, nahi duzunean.
Lehendakari jauna, herri ordezkariak, DIPSko zuzendari jauna, ikerlariak, gonbidatuak, arratsaldeon guztioi. Ohore bada, benetan pozgarria, Passion for Knowledge jaialdiaren irekieran parte hartzea. Are eta gehiago, 4 urteren ondoren, atzera berriro edizio berri bat ekiten diogunean. Hitz labur batzuk batetik jaialdi honen antolakuntzan, buru belarri ari zareten guztioi eskerrak emateko. Donostia International Physics Centerrek asko eman dio Gipuzkoari eta aldi berean gure herriari. Ez bakarrik bikaintasunez egindako ikerkuntza ibilbide oparoagatik, ez bakarrik punta-puntako ikerlari taldeak sortu eta bultzatzeagatik, ez bakarrik Gipuzkoan hainbat eta hainbat proiektu aurreraturen sorrera bultzatzeagatik, ez bakarrik ekonomia aurreratu baten bultzagile nekaezin izateagatik. Baizik eta baita ere, erakusteagatik zenolako garrantzia duen zientziak eta arrazoiak 21. mendeko gizartea eraikitzeko orduan. 21. mendeko komunitate libre, demokratiko eta berdinzale bat eraikitzeko garaian alegia. Erakusteagatik, baita ere, jakintza zientifikoa gizarte baten izate kulturalaren parte garrantzitsua dela. Guztion konpromisoa eta bultzada eskatzen duena. Passion for Knowledge dagoeneko ezinbesteko hitzordua bilakatu da Gipuzkoako eta Euskal Herriko gizarte eta kultura bizitzan. Zorionez, aurten berreskuratzen dugu, berri ona inolako zalantzarik gabe. Horregatik guztiagatik, Gipuzkoako diputatu nagusi bezala, esker ona eta errekonozimendua adierazi nahi diot DIPSeri. Eta nola ez, Pedro Miguel Etxenike jaunari. Ekimen ederrau, hau ere bai esan beharko genuke, ekimen ederrau ere sortzen, zaintzen eta zabaltzen asmatzeagatik. Bihotz-bihotzez eskerrik asko. Harrokeriari gabe, baina harrotasunez, Gipuzkoa zientziaren eta berrikuntzaren lurraldea dela baieztatu dezakegu, hala adierazi du alkateak. Urte eta hamarkada askotan hainbat eta hainbat lagunek egindako ahaleginari esker da hori, lan jarraitua, serioa eta etenik gabekoa. Hori eskatzen du ahalegin honek. Gaur egungo munduan, zientziaren eta arrazoiaren aurkako ahotsak biderkatzen ari diren honetan, irmoki berresten dugu, zientzia ekosistema indartsu eta bizi baten aldeko aldarria eta apustuak. Passion for Knowledge jaialdian sentitzen dugun energiak eta hemen batzen zareten guztion jakintzak bide horretan jarraitzera animatzen gaitu lurralde gisa. Eraldatze betean murgilduta dagoen mundu honetan, ezinbesteko apustua dugu hori. Porque, como comentaba en euskera, contar con una red de ciencia y tecnología avanzada es un factor fundamental para el impulso, no solo de una economía dinámica e innovadora, sino también para fortalecer a nuestra sociedad en parámetros de libertad, democracia y equidad. Un compromiso en el que nos reafirmamos con mayor convicción, si cabe, impulsados por la energía que sentimos hoy aquí. Antes de terminar, quiero también subrayar la labor de las personas que se dedican a la ciencia y a la investigación. Con vuestra labor y dedicación, muchas veces silenciosa y no siempre reconocida, pero siempre fundamental para nuestra sociedad. Contribuís a la construcción de una sociedad más avanzada, más cohesionada, más democrática, al fin y al cabo. Vuestro trabajo es fundamental para la construcción del presente y del futuro de nuestro territorio y de nuestro país. En ese sentido, me gustaría reivindicar muy especialmente la labor de las mujeres en el día de hoy, la labor de las mujeres científicas. Hoy, en este acto inaugural, se reconocerá el trabajo de 3 investigadoras vascas. También tendremos el placer de escuchar a Özlem Türeci y Donna Strickland. El ejemplo de estas 5 mujeres nos muestra el camino para romper con las desigualdades de género existentes en nuestra sociedad, también en el campo de la ciencia. Ellas nos recuerdan la importancia de dar a las mujeres científicas la visibilidad que les corresponde, de impulsar referentes femeninos que a su vez sirvan para fomentar vocaciones científicas entre las mujeres jóvenes. Porque no podemos perder el inmenso talento de las mujeres, porque la ciencia sin duda va a necesitarlo para hacer frente a los grandes desafíos que tenemos en el futuro, pero sobre todo porque es de justicia, porque no podremos llegar a ser una sociedad avanzada e igualitaria si no superamos los estereotipos y las barreras que todavía hoy penalizan a las mujeres, también en el ámbito de la ciencia. Mezu horrekin amaitu nahi nuke, beste behin ere, eskerrak jaialdi honen antolakuntzan ari zareten pertsona guztiei. Eskerrak zuen jakintza gipuzkoarrokin eta euskal herritarrokin partekatuko duzuen aditu guztiei. Eutsi diezaiogun jakin minari, jakintzak berekin dakarren pasioari, eutsi diezaiogun guztion artean zientziaren aldeko apostuari, eta Jon Maiak egin duen bezala eman dezagun jauzi behin betikoa. Eskerrik asko danai.
Eskerrik asko, Mendoza Andrea. Eta guain, jaialdi honen erantzuleari eman behar diogu hitza. Donostia International Physics Centerreko presidentea da, Pedro Miguel Etxenike. Pedro, nahi duzunean, zurea da mikrofonoa.
Urkullu lehendakaria, agintariak, adiskideak, lehenik ona etorritako guztiek, niri eskerrik beroenak. Behin batean, Amerikan senatuan, pastore senatoreak, Wilson Fermi Lab zuzendaria presionatu zuen partikula fisika garrantziaz edo balioaz. Pastore, baldago zerbait esan zion, herrialdearen segurtasunari nolabait lagunduko liokena. Wilsonen erantzuna, ez jauna, ez dut uste. Pastorek galdezka jarraitu zuen. Ez aldauka orduan inolako baliorik. Wilsonen erantzuna. Zerikusia du elkarri ematen diogun balioarekin. Elkarrekiko errespetuarekin. Izakiaren duintasunarekin, kulturarekiko dugun maitasunarekin, pintore honekin, eskultore honekin, eta poeta handiekin du zerikusia. Gizakiok gure herrialdean errespetatu, ohoratu eta maite dugun guztiarekin dauka zerikusia. Ez du zer ikusi zuzenik gure herriaren defentsarekin. Defentsatzea merezi izatean izan ezik. No tiene nada que ver con la defensa de nuestro país, excepto en hacer que merezca la pena defenderlo. Este canto al conocimiento básico, al valor cultural de la ciencia, al reconocer que la ciencia es parte integral del humanismo moderno, ha traído además como consecuencia el triunfo instrumental, la capacidad de solucionar problemas. La curiosidad ha sido lo más útil, la sublime utilidad de la ciencia inútil. La pandemia del COVID ha puesto a la ciencia en el escaparate y ha revelado su importancia decisiva para el futuro de la humanidad. Hoy Stefan Zweig, si escribiese su obra Momentos estelares de la humanidad, incluiría sin duda la vacuna y la rapidez con que se ha llegado a la vacuna. Es una obra colectiva, se debe a mucha gente, de mucho tiempo y muchos siglos. No es algo que surge en la mente de una persona, pero a la vez en estos procesos hay personas singulares. Özlem, Türeci y Ikerbasque pusieron por delante del beneficio económico la excelencia científica en su trabajo para lograr la vacuna, que ha traído como consecuencia salvar millones de vidas. A mí lo primero que me recuerda la palabra ciencia es futuro, optimismo. Optimismo. Los problemas tienen solución, Y nuestro futuro como sociedad dependerá de que sepamos escoger soluciones inteligentes y también sabias a los diversos problemas que tenemos, no siendo crédulos frente a consignas populistas. La mejor manera de comprender la importancia de la ciencia es aprenderla de los que han vivido con apasionamiento su avance en la frontera. Hoy nos hablarán Özlem, Türeci y Donna Strickland. Otros días nos hablarán otras y otros invitados. Y yo les doy las gracias a todos por el honor que nos hacen al aceptar nuestra invitación. Porque una sociedad que se interesa por lo que ocurre en la frontera del conocimiento crea, solamente por hacerlo, un clima de excelencia en el tratamiento del resto de los problemas de la sociedad y que afecta por ósmosis a todas las demás actividades. En el DIPC, en el Donostia International Physics Centre, queremos avanzar el conocimiento y difundirlo. Ciudad de ciencia, de frontera, ciencia en la ciudad, ciencia en el sentido de Euskal Hiria, Euskadi osorako. Es un proyecto estratégico el nuestro, que requiere visión a largo plazo para que la ciencia pueda actuar como semilla transformadora de nuestra sociedad, en el plano cultural, en el plano económico, en el plano ético y en el plano social. Nosotros sentimos el apoyo de nuestra sociedad y sentimos el apoyo con sus instituciones lideradas por nuestro gobierno al frente. Gracias, Lehendakari. Nos sentimos honrados que nos acompañes hoy aquí y te agradecemos de corazón tu presencia. Zurea da hitza.
Aldu nagusia, Donostiako alkatea, sailburua, herri agintari eta herri ordezkariok, baita akademiako ordezkariok, DIPC-ko presidente eta zuzendaria, zientzialariok, jaun-andreok, arratsaldeon. For those who visit us, welcome to Donostia, welcome to Ikerbasque country. I hope you enjoy your visit to our country. I'm sure you will. Ohorea da, Passion for Knowledge ekimenaren irekiera ekitaldian parte hartzea. Ohorea, zientzia erdigunean jartzen duen jaialdi eder honi hasiera ematea. Askotan esan dut, ezagutzak askeago egiten gaitu. Geroz eta gehiago jakin, orduan eta libreagoak izango gara. Aspaldiko esaldiak dira, bai. Passion for Knowledgeek helburu horretan aurrera egiten laguntzen digu. Bide horretan beharrezko heldulekua dugu. Askotan esan dugu, zientzialarien lana da divulgazioan ere aparteko ahalegina egitea. Jakin badakit egiten duzuena. Zuen jarduna bikoitza da, beraz, ikertzea eta zuen aurrerapenen berri ematea. Ahalegin horretan zuen onena ematen jarraitzea eskatzen dizuegu. Erakundeok ere funtsezko garrantzia dugu zeregin horretan. Zuen bide lagunak izan behar dugu. Gure konpromisoa da, eskura ditugun baliabide guztiak, mugatuak direla onartuta, zientziaren eskura jartzen jarraitzea. Hor egongo gara, gure ahaleginik hoberena eskaintzen. Es cierto que el conocimiento científico y el de la ciudadanía avanzan a ritmos distintos. Es normal. Pero debemos trabajar para que esa distancia sea cada vez más reducida. Debemos hacer un esfuerzo mantenido para acercar la ciencia a nuestras vecinas y a nuestros vecinos. Es fundamental que entendamos su importancia, desde las personas más jóvenes hasta las más mayores. Gracias a la ciencia vivimos más. Gracias a la ciencia vivimos mejor. Recuerdo siempre una frase de Pedro Miguel Echenique, quien nos ha dado la bienvenida y fue consejero de Educación del Gobierno vasco. Pedro Miguel Echenique sostiene que cualquier tiempo pasado fue peor. Suscribo tus palabras. Sin embargo, para que esta afirmación cale en la sociedad, para evitar mensajes populistas, tal y como él se ha referido también, sin ninguna base científica, la divulgación juega un papel esencial. Lo digo con total rotundidad. Passion for Knowledge es una iniciativa extraordinaria. Personas científicas tan relevantes nos explican cuestiones complejas de manera sencilla. Esto es simplemente maravilloso. Eskerrik asko por organizar esta iniciativa y lo hago en nombre de la sociedad vasca. Estamos muy orgullosas y orgullosos de ver este auditorio y de ver también en otras ocasiones auditorios llenos para hablar de ciencia, de ver personas jóvenes respondiendo a vuestra llamada, interesándose por la ciencia. Zorionak bihotzez. Donostia, Gipuzkoa, Euskadi es ciencia. Es nuestro recorrido hasta 2023 y en este recorrido hemos construido pilares sólidos que así lo acreditan. Algunos ejemplos lo confirman. En 1980, hace 43 años, en 1980 Euskadi articula los primeros programas pre- y postdoctorales en la Universidad del País Vasco, Euskal Herriko Unibertsitatea. A partir del año 2000, hace 23 años, nacen los centros CIC y los centros BERC. Estos últimos 3 años hemos impulsado singularmente grandes infraestructuras científicas, como se ha mencionado el proyecto Basque Quantum. Son ejemplos que muestran la relevancia de contar con la capacidad de decidir nuestro futuro desde nuestro ámbito competencial en investigación y desarrollo. Seguimos avanzando a través de una visión con las personas en el centro de nuestras políticas. Hemos incorporado el programa Ikerbasque o la Red Vasca de Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación. Contamos con el Plan de Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación 2030-2030, el Plan del Sistema Universitario Vasco o la Estrategia de Ciencia ICUR. Personas y conocimientos son el centro de nuestra visión política y nuestra identidad como sociedad avanzada. Zientziari esker gehiago eta hobeto bizi gara. Zentzu honetan gogoan dut COVID-19 berri izan genuenean. Egun ilunak izan ziren, urte ilunak izan dira. Erantzunik gabeko egun luzeegiak izan ziren, lehenengo aldikoak. Agintari bezala egunero erabaki asko hartu behar izan genituen. Erabaki zailak, jendea kutsatzen eta hiltzen ari zen bitartean. Baina barrenean zerbaitek lasaitzen gintuen. Gure geroa zientziak argituko zigun. Horrela izan zen. Erantzuna eskaini zigun, evidentzia zientifikoaren gainean eraikitako erantzuna. Horri esker gaude hemen ere. Zure baimenarekin, Etxenike jauna, zure beste esaldi batekin itxiko dut gaurko ekitaldia. Zientzia gizadiaren historiako obra kultural kolektiborik garrantzitsuena da. Jarraitu dezagun beraz, obra hau guztion artean eraikitzen. Jarraitu dezagun zientzia 4 haizeetara zabaltzen. Eskerrik asko.
Lehendakari jauna, eskerrik asko. Uste dut lehendakariak orain utzi egin behar gaituela, agenda kontuak direla eta, baina asko eskertzen diogu gurekin izateko tartea topatzeagatik.
El objetivo de Passion for Knowledge es divulgar el conocimiento científico y hacerlo accesible a toda la sociedad. No nos cansamos de repetir que una sociedad culta y formada es una sociedad más libre y más capaz de tomar sus propias decisiones.
Abiatu berri dugun Passion for Knowledge-en edizio honetan, hemen Victoria Eugenian entzun ahal izango ditugun hitzaldi nagusiez gainera, beste hainbat ekintza antolatu ditugu publiko mota guztientzat. Topaketak ikasleekin, astronomia inklusiboko erakusketa bat, naukas passion eta bertso passion saioak, ikus dezagun nolako pasioa piztu duen jaialdiak aurreko edizioetan.
Jaun Andreok, arratsaldeon.
Este primer día de Passion for Knowledge viene cargado de actividades interesantes. A continuación, vamos a tener la oportunidad de escuchar dos conferencias plenarias que van a ser a cargo de Özlem Türeci, una de las personas clave en la carrera de la vacuna contra el COVID-19, y otra a cargo de Donna Strickland, Premio Nobel de Física 2018.
Gaurko bi hitzaldiak ingelesez izango dira. Antzokiaren sarreran, aldibereko itzulpena egiteko gailuak eskuratu ahal izan dituzue, beraz, gogoan izan behar duzuen hizkuntzaren kanala sintonizatu behar duzuela.
Les recordamos que las dos conferencias de hoy serán en inglés y a la entrada al teatro les habrán facilitado los dispositivos de traducción simultánea, por tanto pueden sintonizar los canales según su idioma de preferencia.
Animazio ikusiko dugu?
Bai. Bagoazen gure lehen islaria aurkeztea. Özlem Türeci medikua da ikasketaz, ikertzaile akademikoa eta enpresaria. Türeci eta haren bazkide, Ugursain doktorea, aitzindariak izan ziren RNA mezulariarekin egindako txartoetan. Haien potentzia hobetu zuten eta gizakietan arrakastaz erabiltzeko modua aurkitu zuten.
La importancia de las vacunas de ARN de mensajero ha sido reconocida hoy mismo con el Premio Nobel de Medicina y Fisiología, que recibirán Drew Weissman y Katalin Karikó. En cuanto a nuestra invitada de hoy, Özlem Türeci, además de ser, como hemos dicho, una de las personas clave en la carrera por la vacuna contra el COVID-19, es cofundadora y directora de Biotech, empresa en la que dirige el desarrollo clínico de varios enfoques oncológicos y donde supervisa más de 30 ensayos clínicos internacionales. Además, ha recibido docenas de prestigiosos premios por su trabajo y es titular de más de 500 patentes.
El título de su conferencia es Comunicación molecular con el sistema inmunitario. Vamos a recibirla con un fuerte aplauso.
Dear hosts from the DIPC, dearest Pedro Miguel, and dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here in this wonderful Basque country, in this vibrant town, and here in this marvelous theater. So thank you very much for having me and for inviting me. We scientists, ladies and gentlemen, are driven by two forces. One is the passion for knowledge, and you know that, and the second is that we feel the calling to contribute to a greater cause, even if it's just a tiny bit which we can contribute. And I would like to start my talk by sharing with you the greater cause which inspired us to get interested in molecular communication with the immune system. Many years ago, we were young medical doctors taking care of cancer patients, and more often than not, we had to deliver a devastating message to our cancer patients, namely that there was no medicine against their disease left after they had not responded to the standard of care. And you can imagine that we could only endure this crushing, almost daily experience because we were leading a double life. By day, we were at the bedside of our patients, and in the evenings, in the nights. Is this better? Is this better? No? Is it better if I stand here? Okay. So in the evening and in the nights, we were at the lab bench and were going down the rabbit hole of science. And there were actually two research fields we were interested in. One research field were cancer cells, which we studied, and we understood that these were cells gone wild. Cancer cells evolve from normal cells by accumulating over time random aberrations in their genetic, in their DNA, in their genetic information. And these aberrations are random. And this is the reason why each and every cancer is as unique as the afflicted person. And this made directly clear why the one-fits-all medicines which we were offering our patients would not help. The other system we were interested in, or the other research area, were the forces of the immune system. The immune system which has evolved over a long time for high precision fighting and defense of enemies. The immune system consists of many different forces which are specialized. One of those which I like to imagine, yes, like the ninjas shown here, are the so-called killer cells or T cells, and they are particularly potent in killing enemy cells. The drawback is that the immune system has evolved and is specialized to defend against external pathogens, but not internal aberrations. We, however, asked the question, is it feasible to reprogram the immune system such that it goes against the cancer of our individual patients? And to do this, you need communication. You have to communicate with the immune system. And the way this communication goes is what we call vaccination, working with a vaccine. A vaccine is like a wanted poster, where you tell the immune system about the enemy. And three things are important. If you work with such a wanted poster, you have to be very precise. So you need a format, a tool which helps you to very precisely describe how the perpetrator looks like, so that there are no mix-ups. And the second is that you have to be very potent. Potency is very important here. So that means, again, that the wanted poster has to be distributed widely so that you have many forces on their toes to find the enemy, the perpetrator, and act against it. And third, you need clear language, clear instructions. What should we do? Should the immune systems do when finding this perpetrator, which in this case means attacking? Back in those days, and these were in the late 1990s, all the different technologies we looked into, which qualified or were used as vaccine technologies, did not appear to fulfill these requirements to good communication tool with the immune system until we stumbled over messenger RNA, mRNA. mRNA is the basically oldest information technology invented by nature. It has been discovered in the 1961s. In 1961, there were 2 publications back-to-back, actually, which were authored by 9 scientists, and 3 of them are shown here, which described the discovery of this molecule. And shortly after that, there was a paper by François Jacot, who's also on this slide, and Jacques Monod, who described the principle, how this newly discovered molecule played a role in very fundamental processes in cells of organisms. The way mRNA works naturally in almost all of our cells and also cells of organisms, other organisms, is shown here. Our genetic information, the so-called DNA, so the hardwired information, is within a special compartment. Can you see the, yeah. Within a special compartment of the cell, which is called nucleus, where it is protected. And it does not come out of there, it just lies there. And there is a process which is called transcription, by which blueprints of this information are generated on demand. And this is what we call mRNA. mRNA goes out of this valve, out of this protection part of the cell, into organelles which we call ribosomes. And these are the protein production factories of the cell. And it's like a conveyor belt in which mRNA serves as a template for the information which needs to be transmitted and which needs to be translated, this is how we call this part of the process, to protein. And the proteins, the billions of proteins in the cells, are those elements which coordinate life, which build up the cells and which are basically the important molecules. And after mRNA has done its job, it disappears. You have to imagine this like you have a cookbook, which is the DNA, and you jot down a recipe to take it to your working place in the kitchen, which is the mRNA, and the cake or the souffle which you are producing is the protein, and you throw away your piece of paper, the mRNA, in which you have written down the transient information. So the way how mRNA translates is very well defined. So there is a 4-letter code, and there are very clear rules how what is written down in the DNA is translated into mRNA and is translated then is then translated into protein. So this information technology is very precise and can describe exactly what you want to describe. And we asked the question, why can't we use mRNA as a way to communicate with the immune system? Can we use mRNA to convey the wanted poster of a perpetrator of a cancer cell? And how can we do it? The interesting thing for us was that mRNA is not the wanted poster itself, it's the blueprint. So bringing in a blueprint into a patient who then uses this blueprint to print many, many times this wanted poster, which this appeared like a very attractive way to go. We saw the potential of mRNA as a vaccine, but we also understood that there was a long way to go, many improvements needed. One of those drawbacks back in the 1990s, why mRNA was overlooked by many scientists, was that it had a very short half-life, so the information was there for a short time, which meant that even high doses of mRNA ended up in little amounts of protein and therefore little amounts of effect. And we looked for ways to optimize that, to optimize the performance of the mRNA. Now, mRNA has different elements. This is such a strand of mRNA. And there is one part which is the blueprint of the wanted poster, which in the cells, in the protein production facilities or factories can be used as a blueprint to produce the wanted poster, but there are also multiple other elements as shown here. And we found out that modifying each of them by molecular engineering ended up in prolonging the presence of mRNA in the cells of the patient and optimizing the amounts of protein and thereby the potency we could achieve. And combining of all of those brought us an increase of several orders of magnitudes of the effect. And you can see this here, that the wanted poster was all of a sudden expressed for a much longer time. So that meant by molecular engineering of these parts, we were endowing the mRNA with a VIP pass at the protein production factories. Our colleagues, Drew Weissman and Kati Carico, used another path to come to the same effect. They modified, and this is represented here by these symbols, they modified the chemistry of the mRNA and thereby blunted its recognition by defense elements of cells in which we bring in the mRNA. That means they endowed the mRNA with a stealth mode in order to ensure more protein and more effect. In the COVID-19 vaccine, both these elements, molecular design and the chemistry, are combined. In our cancer vaccines, we only use our approach because we need a more stronger immune response. So this was one field in which we ensured improvements, which was a breakthrough because all of a sudden it increased the potency of the mRNA to induce a strong, precise immune response. There was another area in which improvements were needed. When you use a vaccine, you want to communicate with the immune system. And you have to bring the vaccine to the place where this communication makes sense and has the largest effect. In the body, there are specific organs which are called lymphoid compartments. The spleen is one of them. The spleen is one of them, and all the lymph nodes, which are all across your body, are other parts of this large disseminated organ. And these are the places which you can imagine as boot camps of the immune system. Also physiological immune reactions, communications with the immune system, take place there in these organs. And in these organs, you have different cell types of the immune system. However, there is one cell type which is called dendritic cells. And this specific cell type, these are the coaches, the high performance coaches of the immune system. So what you want to do is to get the information, the blueprint of the wanted poster to these generals who are meant to train the army of your killer immune cells. And so another approach or improvement we ensured was that we developed nanoparticles, which when given intravenously into the bloodstream, traveled in a targeted way to these organs, to lymphoid compartments, and in these organs reached the dendritic cells, the specific generals or trainers of the immune system, and were then used by those to copy, to print the wanted poster and to train basically body-wide those killer cells which were needed for the attack. And you can see what that exactly means here. The blue ones, I'm not sure whether you can see this in the slide. The blue cells are cancer cells, and these cells here are the killer cells of the immune system. They are trained to find the right cancer cell, to stick to it, and to kill it with what we as immunologists call the deadly kiss. One important piece with both improvements was that we could get up the potency so that little amounts of mRNA were sufficient to get a very strong immune response. And as compared with the mRNA formats with which we started, these improvements ensured a more than 1,000 times higher potency. What did this mean? In the COVID-19 pandemic, this meant that we were able to serve a large part of the global human community, because we were able to have a potency increased such that this small bag was sufficient to get 8 million doses of our vaccine. So potency, in particular in global crises such as pandemics, is a very important piece. So, as you might remember, when I started, I talked about cancer and how unique cancers are, and that basically each and every cancer patient has a unique and individual cancer. One of our dreams was to use mRNA, which is a very versatile and easy to manufacture technology, to use it for individualized vaccines. So imagine you have the cancer of one patient, you analyze it, and for this there are technologies which are called next generation sequencing, which give you a high resolution of all the aberrations which are in this cancer. And you find all these aberrations, you use artificial intelligence, AI, in order to select those aberrations which precisely and potently describe this cancer. And then you use mRNA in order to, on demand, in a tailored way, manufacture a vaccine for this very patient. We started with clinical trials doing exactly that. So on-demand manufacturing for individual cancer patients in 2014, and each vaccine took us long. For each and every patient, we needed 3 to 5 months to deliver the vaccine. We treated hundreds of patients over the following years until 2019, and we improved the technologies such that we only needed 3 to 5 weeks to deliver the personalized vaccine in clinical trials which were conducted all over the world. And you can, by knowing this, understand why we were able to deliver a COVID-19 vaccine so fast in only 10 months, because we could build on this expertise which we gained running the production race for each of our hundreds of patients over and over again, each time a race against that patient's growing tumor. And this might also help you to understand why we are able to adapt the vaccine now for each new strain which appears in each new season, as also in this season. That meant that at least in clinical trials, we could move a bit closer to our dream that we were not able to provide standard of care for the cancer diseases of our patients, but we could build them their individualized vaccine. And we hope that one day this will also become, after it has gone through clinical testing, can become a standard of care. So mRNA is an entire toolbox. In the meantime, over the many years now, in which generations of scientists have first contributed to understand mRNA as a biological molecule, how it is regulated, how it works physiologically in cells. Generations of scientists also have contributed to understand how you can tweak the chemistry, the format of mRNA, and also the formulations, the nanoparticulate formulations, to use it preventively and therapeutically in humans, in clinical trials, but also as an approved product. This all has generated an mRNA toolbox in which we have basically different formats of mRNA, also mRNA which comes with its own turbo, which can basically in the patient also amplify the blueprint itself, which is self-amplifying and trans-amplifying mRNA. And we have different types of nanoparticles in which we can envelope the mRNA, which ensure that we can send mRNA to different places, not only into lymphoid compartments, but different places like the liver or other organs where for some types of diseases you need the targeting. And we can encode different types of molecules depending on the type of disease. That means that mRNA has access to many fields now in which it is tested. Cancer is the field which I have already described to you, where multiple clinical trials in advanced stages are being conducted worldwide. Infectious diseases, yes, COVID-19 vaccine development has been successful, but we are also going now into other infectious diseases, including those which are a global health burden, like malaria or tuberculosis. And then there is autoimmunity. You can use mRNA to tell the immune system to attack a certain cell. This is what we do, for example, in cancer. But you can also modify the instructions such that you tell the immune system to hold back. And this is what you need in autoimmunity, where the immune system attacks your structures, your bodily structures, for example, in multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis. And then another interesting field in which we think mRNA will transform is protein replacement. Diseases where a certain protein genetically is deficient or does not work and causes the diseases, here we can replace with mRNA. With this, I would like to end, and thank you for your interest. And this last slide, actually, is for the young ones here in the audience. I have seen that we have many young, either scientists or young people who are interested in science. And to you, I would like to convey the message: many things in science which become breakthroughs start tiny, but can become powerful. So I would like to encourage you to go into science, and if you are there, to be persistent and follow the path. Thank you very much.
Animazioa lehenengo.
Claro, baina esan eskerrik asko.
Thank you very much, Professor Türeci.
espero que hayan disfrutado de esta magnífica charla. A continuación, vamos a recibir a una de las personas que revolucionó la física del láser.
Así es.
Donna Strickland.
Perdón. Así es, Strickland recibió el Premio Nobel de Física en 2018 gracias a su pionera investigación en el campo de los láseres. Fue la tercera mujer en la historia en obtener este galardón. Y es que los tipos de láseres que han desarrollado han sido de gran relevancia en la investigación óptica y han alcanzado infinidad de aplicaciones médicas, entre ellas la cirugía ocular correctiva.
Strickland doktoreak eskatu digu mesedez bere hitzaldia ez grabatzeko. Beraz, eskertuko dizuegu kamarak eta mugikorrak gordetzea eta zuzenean gozatzea bere azalpenez.
Entzun dezagun beraz, intentsitate handiko pultsu optiko ultralaburrak sortzen izeneko hitzaldia. Txalo bero bat, mesedez?
Okay, so thank you very much. I guess my microphone is working. I do want to thank the organizers to inviting me to speak in this incredible place and to enjoy this wonderful region of Basque and the food. And I also really appreciate the fact that here in Spain, they seem to really appreciate science. So I'm going to walk us through about 150 years of science in the next 30 minutes, because to understand the high-intensity laser physics that I was trying to push forward, you have to understand nonlinear optics that came before it. We didn't have nonlinear optics until we had a laser, and we wouldn't have had a laser if people hadn't been studying how light and matter interact. So that's the 150 years I'm going to walk us through. And so 150 years ago, scientists were still trying to decide, is light a wave or is light made up of particles? And there was reason to think both. And so it was a theorist that came along in the mid-19th century and showed us this theory that we use to this day, that light just had to be a wave. Now, as an experimentalist, though, I can tell you that a theorist can tell us something is true, but only an experimentalist can prove it. And so the experimentalist then thought, what would be the definitive experiment to show that light was a wave? So we're by the ocean here, although it's just a sandy, beautiful sandy beach, so you have to imagine being on a stony beach, which I have a cottage on a slightly stony beach. So we then know that when the waves are small, the stones don't get pushed at all on the beach. But when the waves come crashing in, you can watch the stones get pushed up the beach. And so this was the experiment that they were going to do with light. They were going to shine light on the material and watch the electrons come off. And then they were going to turn the power of that light up, which means the height of the wave would be higher, and the electrons should fly off faster, just like the stones on the beach. So now I don't actually know why they chose to use different colors, and the only colors that I'm going to talk about are the ones we see with our eyes. And so if you look, the longest wavelength, which is the distance between the peaks that we see with our eyes, is red. The color that we see best is green, which is why I'm using a green laser pointer here. This is the one we see the best. It's shorter. And then finally, we see the shortest light we see is violet. And this is not quite a factor of 2 smaller than red. OK, so they used red light, and no electrons came off. No matter how powerful they made the red light, no electrons came off. When they used green light, electrons came off at a very slow speed, and when they turned up the power of that green light, more electrons came off, but at the same slow speed. And finally, when they used violet light, then the electrons came off at a high speed, and again, when they turned up the power, more electrons came off. But the speed was always given more by the distance between the crests than the height of the wave. And so this flew in the face of light being a wave. And so scientists were once again thinking about how to explain this, and why would it matter what the distance between the crusts are. So at the beginning of the 20th century, Max Planck taught us that indeed you can't change the energy of light all the way to zero continuously. There is a minimum energy unit, and this is what we call the photon now. He also showed us that the photon's energy is indeed given by the color, and it's actually given by the inverse of the distance between the crusts. It's the frequency, how rapidly are those wavefronts hitting us, okay? And so we also, in our own everyday life, really understand energy like gravity. We all know that it's harder to walk up many flights of stairs than just one flight of stairs. We know if we, okay, I'm going to be Canadian and not Spanish here at all, but if in Canada we want to go sledding and we want to go fast, we know we have to start at a high hill to be going fast at the bottom of the hill. So we all know that height is related to energy in gravity, so that's what we're going to use on our pictures. And so again, we would know that if we wanted to pick up something heavy, it's easier to pick it up not very high. So what Max Planck showed us is that red light, which has the longest distance or the smallest frequency of these two, has the least energy. And so a red photon is like a child-sized photon and can only lift the electron that high. Then the green light is an adult-sized photon, and so it can lift it higher. And then the violet photon is almost twice as tall as this red photon. So now we're going to use basketball. And so last week, I found out, because I said that basketball was invented in Canada, even though it's better known in the United States. And somebody after my talk said, I just want you to know, Spain has won 5 Olympic gold medals in basketball, and Canada's only won 1. So I'll give you that. You know, I just knew that you liked soccer better, but okay. Anyway, we're going to play basketball, and we're going to play basketball with a child-sized net. So now, if you only have child-sized photons, and they're trying to get their electron through the basketball net, even on their tippy toes, they can't do it. And if you turn up the power in this photon picture, you have more of these child-sized photons all around the net, but none of them can put their ball through the net, so the electrons did not come off. Now with green light, and this is adult-sized photons, now the adults are big enough that they can drop their ball into the net, but you'll see it's the same height, and so it's slow speed. Again, if you turn up the green light, then there'll be more of these adult-sized photons all around the net, dropping the balls in at slow speed. But now we know that the violet photons are like pro basketball players. They're the tall ones. And so now they're well above the net, and they drop it in, and it's going to be fast speed. So it was Albert Einstein that when he won his Nobel Prize, which he could have won for so many things, we in optics like to show that he won in particular for explaining the photoelectric effect. Usually when we describe the photoelectric effect to our physics undergraduate students, we're talking about the quantum mechanics of it. But for this talk, I want us to concentrate on the fact that this is a linear interaction. What do I mean by that? I mean it's always one photon interacting with one atom at a time. And if that photon has more energy than what the atom is holding onto its electron with, then the electron can leave with the difference in the energy. And if you turn up the power and you have more photons at play, they will meet up with more atoms, but the interaction is always one at a time. So that if you double the photons, you'll double the electrons off and triple, which is why it's linear. So this is one of the reasons that I use this as my linear interaction. There are many, but this will be the one you'll see at the end of my talk that I did for my thesis with the high-intensity laser too. So now, we're at the beginning of the 20th century, and I think scientists thought they had it all figured out, that they understood how light and matter interacted. And then along comes this woman, Maria Goeppert-Mayer. Now, she's famous for being the second woman to win a Nobel Prize in physics, but that's for work she did in the 1950s when she was at Argonne National Labs, and that's on the nuclear shell model that I know nothing about, so let's not discuss it. But what she did, when she was still a graduate student working with Max Born in Germany, was that she's the one who asked the question, why can't atoms absorb the energy of 2 photons at the same time? Why are atoms always stuck just interacting with 1 photon at a time? And again, she's a theorist, so she didn't have to worry about technology. She could just think about it herself, put some pen to paper, and she came up with a theory that showed absolutely atoms could absorb the energy of 2 photons at the same time. She did that work in 1930, and she published the paper in 1931. Now, she talked about 2-photon absorption, but I want to stick with the photoelectric effect. She showed them that if we had 2 red photons, they would stand, the energy would add up together, and it would actually be like 1 ultraviolet photon, because violet's not quite twice. This would be twice, and the ball would go through that fast. So she showed us that it would work, but nobody had seen it, and nobody would see it for another 30 years. Oops, okay, hang on. Oh yeah, okay. So it's Peter Franken's group in Michigan. They were the first to see a nonlinear interaction. If you're talking about multiphoton physics, you are a molecular physicist or an atomic physicist, and you're watching what happens to the atom or molecule. If you're an optical physicist like me and you watch what happens to the light, then you're doing nonlinear optics. Very subtle difference, but I'll just bring that in. So Peter Franken, his group, didn't look for 2-photon absorption, which was what Maria Gope-Mayer talked about. He also did not do 2-photon ionization. What he was doing in his group, hello, there you are, is that he had the atoms absorb momentarily the energy of 2 red photons, but they didn't hang on to it, and they didn't release an electron. What happened instead is that 1 photon, twice the energy, went out of the material. This is now what we call second harmonic generation, but this was the first nonlinear optical thing that was seen, and it wasn't seen until 1961. It was only in 1 part in a million to 1 part in 10 million also. So then that begs the question, why did it take 30 years before anybody could see what Maria Gope-Mayer told us should happen? And the reason is that the laser came along in 1960. So this is my Nobel talk, and so I do want to pay homage to the people who won the Nobel Prize in this area before me. Basov and Prokhorov were working together in Russia, while Towns was working independently from them in the United States. They invented the maser. M stands for microwave, where L stands for light. A microwave photon's even lower energy, and it was technologically easier to do. So they did that work first that brought us towards the lasers. Art Shallow then won a few years later for laser spectroscopy, but he's one of the people credited with how to change the technology so it would work for the light we see with our eyes. But it's really this man, Ted Maiman, who did not get to win a Nobel Prize, but it was Ted Maiman who was the first one on May 16th, 1960, who did invent the laser and got it to work. So what's so special about laser light? Why am I even using a laser to point with? So this very bright light that's shining on me, almost blinding me here, and lighting all of us up, is the type of light that, because it's white, that means your eye is seeing every color. So every single color photon comes out of these lights. They also are lighting us all up, which is good. That means the light goes in every single direction. But most importantly, the photons coming from this light don't care what the other photons are doing, right? 1 photon goes when it wants to, in the direction it wants to, at the color it wants to, and the others are all doing their own thing. But with a laser, they're all the same color, they're all going in the same direction, which is why you see this very bright green spot here. This is much less power than what's shining on me there, but because it's all concentrated in 1 spot, you see it, that's the intensity is higher. So it's 1 color, 1 direction, and they all know what each other are doing. When one's peaking, they're all peaking, and when one's troughing, they're all troughing. And so classically then they add up to be a giant wave. There we go. Okay, so I like to think about nonlinear optics though in the photon picture. And because all of the photons coming out of a lamp are different colors, I like to say they're all dancing to a different beat. And not only are they all dancing to a different beat, they don't care how anybody else is dancing. And therefore, they cannot crowd onto the dance floor. And so we try with lenses to focus the beam down to as small as we can, but we can only focus down to its wavelength, which is on the order of 1 micron, or a thousandth of a millimeter. Your hair is 50 microns, so it's 50 times smaller than that. So that seems small until you realize an atom is 10,000 times smaller again. So if you look at the volume of an atom and ask, what's the probability of seeing 2 photons there at the very same time, so they can be absorbed at the same time, it's too small to see with regular light. But when the laser came along, and I've put Nicholas Bloomberg in here, who won his Nobel Prize with Art Shallow, but he's considered the father of nonlinear optics, like Maria Goeppert-Mayer is the mother of multiphoton physics, so I put him here. But now, with the laser, they're all dancing to the same beat. And not only are they all dancing to the same beat, they're all dancing together to that same beat. And that's why they can crowd onto the dance floor. And so when the laser came along and we used lenses and we focused that light down, the probability of having 2 photons in that small volume was 1 in a million to 10 million, and they were able to see it in 1961. So what has any of this got to do with me and my Nobel Prize? So when I joined Gerard Mourou's group in the early 80s, he gave me the paper written by this man, Stephen Harris, a professor at Stanford University. And Stephen, at this point, was wondering, theoretically, you know, it's great that we have lasers that work in the infrared and the visible, but wouldn't it be great if we could somehow have that same coherent process where all the photons talk to each other up into the extreme ultraviolet and towards the X-ray? And so we couldn't do it with lasers, so he thought, let's do it with this nonlinear optics, but let's not have 2 photons added together or 3 photons, let's have a lot. So Gerard said, read the paper, see if you want to do your PhD on this, and if you do, think of a scheme that will work with our lasers. So it did seem interesting, and so I came up with a scheme, and it was going to be 9 photons absorbed to make 1 photon with 9 times the energy. And there was 2 parts of my thesis. One was to figure out how to make a twice ionized plasma of nickel to be the medium. That part never worked, so I don't talk about that anymore. And the other part of my thesis was I didn't want just 2 or 3 photons in that volume. I wanted 9 photons in that volume. And so I didn't need just a laser. I needed an intense laser. And obviously that part worked, which is why I am here talking to you today. So that's what I'm trying to do, get the 9th harmonic. How'd I do it? Well, how does one make an intense laser? So I've already pointed out that this little milliwatt of power seems pretty bright. I can also make it a 1-second light pulse, just by doing this. And if we had a window here, which we do not, and I knew where the moon was, so let's assume it's that way, and I shine my 1-second light pulse, it is always amazing to me how fast light travels, because it would be almost 3/4 of the way to the moon before I stop that 1-second light pulse, okay? 1-second light pulse, unimpeded, would stretch out over 300,000 kilometers long, right? It took me 7 hours to fly here from Canada, but light can get 3/4 of the way to the moon in 1 second. All right, so now I have an energy up there of 1 millijoule, because I said the power coming out of here is 1 milliwatt, and power is energy per unit time. So every second, a millijoule of energy comes out of this laser. So now I can hold it to my hand, and if I hold it really, really still, I can almost feel my skin warming up there. So 1 millijoule of energy doesn't seem like it's very much, but I can tell you it's all it takes to cut the cornea of your eye or glass parts. And so what's the difference between the millijoule coming out of here every second and the millijoule that can cut glass? I like to say I built a laser hammer. Sometimes it's energy in to get something out, but sometimes just like driving a nail into a piece of wood, where you can push with all your might, and the nail doesn't go in. You pick up a hammer, and in it goes. And so I needed a laser hammer. So I didn't want my energy spread over 300,000 kilometers. Now, that first experiment that was done in 1961 used a millisecond laser. So on the scale to going to the moon, it's quite small, okay, but it's still 300 kilometers long. I'll also tell you they had a whole joule, so it's 1,000,000 times more intense than was coming out of here. That's still not enough. That was only 2 photons, 1 part in a million to 10 million. So we got the light, whoops, well, I went too fast. Go back. Are we there? We're there. I got it down to 1 picosecond, which is a millionth of a second. And so all the energy coming out of here, stretched over 300,000 kilometers, is now squeezed into just 1/3 of a millimeter. And when we had all the energy focused down that tightly, then we had a laser hammer. So now the question is, how do we do it? And we're going to go back to Earth here, and we're going to go to Rochester, New York, where I did my PhD. And I did the work at the Laboratory for Laser Energetics, which is a Department of Energy-funded facility for laser fusion. So the very first week I was in Rochester, a fellow Canadian took me over to introduce me to Gerard and showed me this beautiful laser. And I've said this many times, when I saw this red and green laser, so it's a red laser pumped by a green laser, it's called a dye laser because through this tube is liquid dye. If it got on your clothes were dyed orange. Okay? So it's a beautiful laser, and I just thought, how much fun would it be to work around a laser that looks like a Christmas tree all year round? I want to work in this lab. So that's why I joined the group. No great deep thinking about it, just that's why I wanted to join the group. Anyway, this was an example. Gerard's already had even shorter pulses than I'm talking about. These pulses were 10 times shorter, and so they were only 1/30th of a millimeter. But a dye laser is a type of laser, which I'll explain later, that cannot be made energetic. So we already had short pulse lasers. Right across the lobby was this laser, the Omega laser, and this is the laser that was used for laser fusion. So we finally have scientific break-even with a megajoule laser now for laser fusion, but this was the way it looked in the 1980s. It's a kilojoule laser. Okay, so 1 million times more energy that comes out of this every second is in there. Just to give you an idea of just the size, this is the size of a football field, whichever you call football, and this is the size of a human adult. So this is a big laser. Energy requires big lasers, and therefore big money. And so on one side of the Laboratory for Laser Energetics, we had these really short pulses, and on the other side, we had really big energy. But when we put them together, we destroyed the laser itself, okay? Which was unexpected, and it sort of made 2 things happen. When they saw the destruction of these very expensive lasers, they sent, one group of people went off wondering why that was working that way, and they studied the nonlinear optics of it, and the laser jocks like me were told, don't put short pulses down very expensive big lasers. It just causes damage. Don't do it. So that's where we were in the 1980s, and so this is why we needed to come up with chirped pulse amplification. So this is now the first color photo from the Nobel Prize, because it used to be, not history, but obviously Gerard and I are now history. We're just now got the 6th one after us, but I'll keep my picture in color. This is us partying, December 10th, 2018. So the beauty of our idea is really in its simplicity. We wanted a laser hammer. Here's the laser hammer. We want a lot of energy in a short pulse. We do not want our laser hammer hammering our amplifier. So what did we do? We start with a low energy short pulse, and we stretch it and make it a long pulse. All right? And we bring the density of photons down. We can safely amplify them up. And when they're safely out of the amplifier, we then compress it back and make it short. We did ours in air. Now with the most powerful lasers in the world, this has to be done in vacuum because even air is a nonlinear medium. We could have called it stretched pulse amplification. That sounded boring, I guess. And so we chose chirped. A bird's chirp is the fact that the audio frequency changes in time. And so our light frequency is changing in time, and that's why we call this a chirp, and so that's why we called it chirped pulse amplification. So how did we do it? So this looks like I'm showing you the very same laser as I showed you before, because it is, but now it's got a different title. Now I'm calling it neodymium YAG, because we're not actually watching this part anymore. We're back here. This is the laser that I'm going to start the whole thing with. This is the neodymium YAG laser, and it is an infrared laser. We cannot see the photons. There are actually the most powerful laser here is right here, but we can't see it because it's in the infrared. But this is a frequency doubling apparatus. That's the same as what the Franken group used in 1961, but now the intensity is so high, we can do it with 10% efficiency. So we had 2 watts becoming 200 milliwatts. Our laser mirrors are really good for the color they're supposed to be really good for. So 99.99% of that green is turning the corner, but the mirror will be terrible for the infrared, and so all the light just came through and was just put into a beam dump and wasted. And so I was given that beam to use. So there I am as a young grad student. And so instead of the beam dump, this is now what goes into the fiber, and here's my fiber. I'm just going to tell one story about this picture. Of course, this is for the cover of the LLE Quarterly Review. They always put students on the cover to show how they were training us. And of course, we had to show we were laser safe, and that's what lovely laser goggles looked like in 1980s. But the photographer did not like the green glass in front of my eyes, so I'm actually only wearing frames, okay? But it's an infrared laser, so you can't tell if it's off or on, and so it's off, and I'm safe. Anyway, so there I am, and this is the fiber stretcher, okay? So how does it work? Well, first, I already sort of told you that lasers only have one color, like the one I'm using to point with. But you cannot have a short pulse if you only have one color. So actually, the shortest pulse lasers are like these bright white lights and have all the colors of the rainbow in them. But we can't let them be like a light bulb, which is like noise. We have to have all the colors doing the same thing. And so we have something in our laser called a mode locker, and it's like the conductor of a symphony orchestra. Now, when you go to listen to a symphony orchestra play, and they're warming up their instruments, they all sound terrible, right? And that's like the light bulb. So they're all playing their own notes, listening to themselves, and not caring what anybody else is doing, and so it sounds like noise. But when the conductor brings down his baton, and they all play their notes together, then you have beautiful music. And so that's what the mode locker and the laser does for us. It says to all of the colors, right here, at this point in space and time, go together. But because there's a different distance from the violet's very close and the red's almost twice as far away, that as you leave here, you'll find that you have as many peaks as troughs. And the more colors you bring in, the faster the black, which is the addition of all the colors, becomes short. The shorter the pulse you want, the more colors you want. All right, so we have all these colors in our short pulse, and now we're going to go down a fiber. There we are. And once you go out of vacuum and into medium, the different colors all talk to the medium a little bit differently, and some have more in common than others. But the red has if you're talking about something transparent for these colors, the red is the least in common, so it runs through the glass. The green sort of thinks there's something in common, they'll walk, and the blue thinks they should be friends, and so they crawl while they talk atom to atom through the glass. So at the end of my 1.4 kilometers of optical fiber, I had the pulses stretched with the red out at the front and the blue colors at the back. So that's how I stretched the pulse. And now it's time to amplify. There we go. And so again, I do like to annoy my atomic and molecular colleagues, because I always point out at this point that I am an optical physicist, and so only photons have personality in my slides, and so these are atoms. So these atoms are sitting there, and they're waiting to get excited. We used a flash lamp to excite them. If you engineer it well, then you have most of them lit up, ready to go. So what's the difference between the dye laser that cannot be energetic and the neodymium glass laser that can be, is the fact that one is like a marathoner, that's the glass, and the other one is like a 100-meter dash runner, right? One of them wants to go really fast and expel all its energy, and the other will hang on to it. And so a dye laser says, now, you can pump me up, but I'm going to give up the energy quickly, and it starts to fall down and giving up its energy and sending off light in all directions, and it just becomes a light bulb. But neodymium glass will sit there and go, hey, I can stay energetic for a long, long time. I'll wait for a photon to come along. And so here comes the photon, and it's the very same color. So also, although I talked about Albert Einstein at the beginning explaining the photoelectric effect, it was also Albert Einstein in 1916 that showed us the equations for the laser. And he was the one who pointed out that not only if you're in the ground state, the light can make you absorb to the excited state, but it can also stimulate it back to the ground state. So this photon says to this atom, hey, we have the same energy. I'll take your energy and we'll walk together hand in hand as two photons. Those two photons meet up two more atoms and they say, hey, we'll take your energy and we'll walk forward together hand in hand and hand in hand. Go. Go, 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 go. And finally, there'll be 8. Oh, no, you really went. Okay, so then you have 8. All lasers start this way. All lasers start with one noise photon going in the right direction and become 2, 4, 8, and have this exponential growth. But when you have this exponential growth, you've left most of the energy behind. This is one of the reasons, not the only one, that we do have to put mirrors at either side and go back and forth and back and forth. So again, I'm going to use a Canadian analogy. I'm going to have to come up with one for warm weather countries. But I liken it to needing a snow plow, that you want to go and plow through that energy and gather it all up. And so there is something that is an energy per unit area, and every type of laser medium has it that says when you get to that energy per unit area, we will gather all of the energy that we can going through. So this is why we focus down tight in a laser, because we have to start with one photon. We get it to that point, and then if you want more energy, you have to make the beam bigger, go through the next amplifier. You want more energy, you have to make the beam bigger, so you always stay at that energy per unit area. This is why the big energy lasers become so big. Glass is one of the biggest at 5 joules per square centimeter. If you want to get to a kilojoule or now a megajoule, that just tells you how big the beam has to be. So once we know what laser we're using and we know what energy per unit area we need to do so we efficiently take the energy, it's the photon density, that number of photons per unit volume, that determines if we're going to have a problem with nonlinear optics. And so that says how long it has to be stretched. Okay? And so that's why we knew that we had to stretch our pulses from 1/3 of a millimeter to, and this again works better in the United States, a foot long. Okay? But 1/3 of a meter, roughly. 1/3 of a meter. So we needed to stretch it that 1,000 times. And now all we left to do is compress it. We use 2 gratings. This is the same as a prism. We've all seen light go through a prism, and it sends the different colors, different directions. A grating just does it a whole lot more than a prism. And we're going to use 2 parallel ones. So the red is out ahead of the green, ahead of the blue, but the red is going to bend more than the green, bend more than the blue. So when it comes off the second grating as parallel, they're all parallel together, but now the blue line is equal long to the red line, and that's how we bring them all back together again, and we have a short pulse. And so that's the whole story. It was a Thursday night, and I still remember that Thursday night when my colleague Steve Williamson came in with his device that could measure how short this pulse was, and it worked. So that's it. That's just showing that it is indeed a short pulse and that it's intense. So back to my PhD thesis. I still had not figured out how to make twice ionized nickel. I was in my 7th year of my PhD. Something had to be done. And luckily for me, Silong Chin came down from the University of Laval for a sabbatical. He wanted to be the first one to do science with this new intense laser. He helped convince Gerard to let me do multiphoton ionization. So that's the highly nonlinear of the one I talked about, the photoelectric effect. And so we were going to try to ionize this. So instead of the height, we think about the electron being in a well, and if it's going to be ionized and free, it has to get this much energy. It was going to take 11 photons to pick it up and kick it out. It would have gone to the 11th order in power. We did not see that. By the time we had our chirp pulse amplifier working, the laser power and intensity was so high, we no longer had to worry about the photon picture. We were back to it just being a great big giant classical wave. And that great big giant classical wave came to that well and just tipped it over, and the electron was free to leave. And so again, when we had the new technology, we had a new way for light and matter to interact. And we now had the laser hammer, and we could actually start to machine transparent objects like glass, because we no longer had to worry about absorbing the photons one at a time. And so this is why we now can cut a cornea or cut glass, because we had this new type of technology. And I think I end there. That's what got me beside the King of Sweden. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Professor Strickland. This was a very enlightening talk. Right?
Donna Strickland, Özlem Türeci eta bihar entzungo dugun Sandra Diaz ere, inspirazio iturri dira zientziara dedikatzen diren emakume askorentzat, eta horregatik, ohorea da guretzat, beraiek banatzea azken tarte honetan ospatutuko ditugun Ikerbasque aitortzak.
El objetivo de estos reconocimientos que otorgan el Departamento de Educación del Gobierno Vasco e Ikerbasque es visibilizar a las mujeres investigadoras en Euskadi y su labor para que sirvan de ejemplo e inspiración a las nuevas generaciones de investigadoras. Para ello, se destaca a mujeres que se encuentran en 3 etapas diferentes de su carrera científica. Una etapa prometedora, otra de consolidación y una última avanzada.
Honen bestez, starting kategorian, ikertzaile gazte baten ekarpen nabarmenaren aitorpena jasoko duen pertsona, Sara Barja izango da, Ikerbasque Research Associate, ikertzailea Euskal Herriko Unibertsitatean eta Materialen Fisika Zentroan. Ezagutu dezagun.
Frente a la pregunta o el planteamiento que se suele hacer de por qué es importante que las mujeres hagan ciencia, hago el planteamiento al revés. ¿Qué motivos habría para que las mujeres no hiciesen ciencia? A mí no se me ocurre ninguno. Siempre he tenido la fortuna de que todas las personas que han estado acompañándome siempre se han molestado en darme el crédito que me correspondía al trabajo que estaba haciendo. Todo eso me ha dado la capacidad de crear ideas originales, crear financiación independiente, de tener una ciencia de excelencia, una colaboración o una transmisión de ese conocimiento.
Pasamos ahora a la categoría Consolidator, que reconoce a una investigadora líder en su ámbito de investigación. Y este año ese reconocimiento corresponde a Ainhoa Magrach, investigadora Ikerbasque, Research Professor en BC3, Basque Center for Climate Change.
Primero estuve obsesionada con la arqueología. Leía todo sobre Egipto y quería trabajar en descubrir cosas nuevas. Y luego apareció Jane Goodall y fue donde me cambió todo y dije, pues yo quiero hacer lo que hace ella. En el caso de las niñas es muy importante que vean que hay gente como ellas que está haciendo esto que ellas quieren hacer pero que igual piensan que no pueden porque son todo hombres, pues que ese no es el caso. El hecho de ver mujeres que tienen hijos y que siguen dedicándose a la ciencia y viajando fuera, en el caso de España está Ana Traveset, que es un referente en ecología, tiene 2 hijos y sigue teniendo una carrera impresionante viajando por todo el mundo a día de hoy. Entonces ver que alguien puede hacer eso te anima a decir, pues yo también puedo, ¿por qué no?
Eta azkenik, ikerketa arloko karrera osoaren advanced aitortza, Alicia Alonsorentzat da, UPV-HUko biokimika eta biologia molekular saileko katedradunarentzat.
Bueno, yo creo que una cosa que tenemos en común los científicos es que mantenemos un aspecto de la infancia que es la curiosidad. Y si tú mantienes la ilusión y mantienes ese espíritu de curiosidad con el afán de intentar buscar tú mismo las respuestas, pues yo creo que tienes tarea para mucho tiempo. El problema en principio es el de la ciencia en general, que hay que divulgarla pues, para seguir captando gente en un campo en el que comparado con otros no está tan bien pagado y cuesta mantenerse en un determinado nivel. A la entrada hay una cierta paridad, pero para lo que sirven los referentes femeninos, sobre todo los referentes femeninos de personas que ocupan posiciones de liderazgo, bien en su centro de investigación, bien en su universidad o bien en organismos internacionales, es para que no se queden solamente en estadios inferiores o medios, sino que aspiren a esas posiciones de liderazgo. Es una carrera de fondo, pero yo creo que en general la ilusión no se pierde.
Vamos a recibir ahora en el escenario a las personas que harán entrega de estos reconocimientos. Llamamos al escenario a Joaquim Bildarratz, consejero de Educación y presidente de Ikerbasque, a Donna Strickland, Sandra Díaz y Özlem Türeci. Por favor, un aplauso para ellos.
La primera de las premiadas, Sara Barja, recibe el reconocimiento de Ikerbasque en la categoría Starting de la mano de Donna Strickland. Un aplauso.
Nadie les dice nada. Consolidator kategorian, Ainhoa Magratzek jasoko du aitortza, Sandra Díazen eskutik.
Eta azkenik, Ikerbasque Advanced aitortza, Alicia Alonsok jasoko du Özlem Türeciren eskutik.
Vamos a hacer una pequeña foto de familia, si pueden colocarse aquí, por favor. If you can locate yourselves there to make a family picture.
And if you can mix a little bit with one another.
And get a little bit closer to the front. Yes, thank you.
Muchas gracias. Enhorabuena a las tres. Aquí tienen el micrófono si quieren decir unas palabras. Sara, cuando quiera.
Bueno, hace 13 años, cuando era una estudiante de doctorado, tuve la oportunidad de conocer, gracias a un Passion for Knowledge, la iniciativa que en Euskadi se estaba haciendo por promover el avance social a través del conocimiento. Por eso, en ese momento decidí que después de mi estancia postdoctoral, este era el lugar adecuado para seguir creciendo. Por eso, estar hoy aquí en este teatro, recibiendo este premio de la mano de Donna Strickland, hace que todo sea todavía mucho más especial y emotivo. Así, es un orgullo para mí pensar que ahora yo también soy una pequeña parte en ese engranaje de ese proyecto que me ilusionó hace años. Quiero dedicar este premio a todas esas personas que han compartido este camino conmigo, a mi familia y a mis colegas, que han estado apoyándome en los momentos difíciles y también celebrando cada uno de los pasos que iba dando. Este reconocimiento reconoce esa labor que hay detrás de este equipo. Y es que eso es la ciencia, un trabajo en equipo de aprendizaje continuo. Quiero aprovechar también la oportunidad de extender este agradecimiento del Departamento de Educación y a Ikerbasque a la Universidad del País Vasco, al Donostia International Physics Centre y al Centro de Física de Materiales por haberme apoyado estos años. Y es que vuestra labor, vuestro compromiso con las generaciones más jóvenes es completamente fundamental, el brindarnos ese entorno de colaboración para desarrollar nuestras ideas, el aportarnos ese espacio, tanto físico como de conocimiento, para que podamos seguir desarrollando y enfrentándonos a nuevos retos dentro de la comunidad científica. Por todo ello, muchísimas gracias, eskerrik asko, and thank you.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias, mi esker. Quería dar las gracias también al Gobierno vasco, al Departamento de Educación y a Ikerbasque por este reconocimiento, pero también por la confianza depositada en mí a lo largo de toda mi carrera, que empezó con una beca predoctoral del Gobierno vasco y que sigue a día de hoy con financiación de Ikerbasque. También muchas gracias al BC3, a mi centro, por todo el apoyo que me dan siempre. Hoy recibo este reconocimiento a título individual, pero como ha dicho Sara, la ciencia es el resultado de un trabajo en equipo. Y yo he tenido la suerte de trabajar con equipos excelentes en mis diferentes experiencias a nivel nacional e internacional. Quería aprovechar también para agradecer a todas las mujeres que me han influido y que han sido referentes en mi vida tanto personal como profesional. A todas las mujeres que han abierto camino en la ciencia y en concreto a las que han abierto camino en el mundo de la ecología. Mujeres como Sandra Díaz, de la cual es un absoluto honor recibir este reconocimiento. Pero quería dar las gracias también a las mujeres de mi entorno, a mi ama y a mi tía que están hoy aquí conmigo y a todas las mujeres de su generación, porque gracias a su lucha hoy estamos aquí nosotras. Quería dar las gracias también a mi hija y a todas las niñas de su generación, porque gracias a ellas, desde hace 6 años, cada vez que me he planteado abandonar la carrera científica por todos los obstáculos que me he encontrado, pienso que tengo la responsabilidad de ser un ejemplo para estas nuevas generaciones y de demostrar que las mujeres somos capaces de hacer ciencia excelente y de calidad. Y trabajar también para que, cuando mi hija tenga mi edad, este tipo de eventos que pretenden visibilizar la labor de las mujeres en la ciencia no sean tan necesarios, porque seremos tantas las mujeres científicas e investigadoras que será imposible ignorarnos. Mi esker.
Saludos, jauna, autoridades, público en general, ponentes. Quiero expresar primero mi agradecimiento al Gobierno vasco, Ikerbasque y al Comité de Selección por este reconocimiento. A mi familia, a mis padres, que siempre potenciaron la educación y no pusieron ninguna objeción cuando de las posibilidades profesionales que se me abrían elegí la más incierta, la investigación. A mis referentes, aquellas mujeres que tras una estancia en el extranjero volvieron a una España en la que montar un laboratorio, un departamento era muy difícil. En mi campo, principalmente, Margarita Salas, entre otras, Gabriela Morreale, María Teresa Miras y Pilar Carbonero, con raíces vascas. A mis hijas y resto de la familia y amigos, por el tiempo que les he robado, que intento compensarles principalmente con los nietos. A mi compañero en lo profesional y en lo personal, sabes que juntos siempre he sido más que dos. Al CSIC, que confió en mí al poner en marcha el centro mixto con la universidad, la unidad de biofísica. A mis mentores en los inicios de mi carrera, hombres, pero que me ayudaron, Denis Chapman, Vittorio Lusati, Manuel Cortijo. A todos mis colaboradores, particularmente a mis doctorandos, presentes y pasados. Con ellos me han enseñado muchísimo. Espero haberles ayudado en su carrera. Soy un producto orgulloso de la Universidad del País Vasco, donde me formé y he desarrollado la mayor parte de mi carrera profesional. Mi carrera, que significa docencia e investigación. Es ineludible, está ligado a la academia en mayúsculas ambas funciones. Y es nuestro reto mantener, en una situación que parece más difícil, que podamos desarrollar ambas posibilidades. Es importante para la universidad y para nuestra sociedad. La carrera científica es una maratón rara. Es de relevos y con una meta que se va separando, se va alejando, es infinita. Pero precisamente perseguirla es lo que nos acerca más a la inmortalidad. Las mujeres vascas somos cabezotas, casi tanto como la profesora Carico. Así que ánimo y a por ello. Eskerrik asko.
You can go back to your seat now. Thank you. Enhorabuena a las tres. Muchísimas gracias.
Emakume zientzialari hauei egindako aitortzarekin bukatutzat emango dugu gaurko saioa.
Eskerrik asko guztioi, Passion for Knowledge jaialdiaren lehen saio honetan gurekin izateagatik, eta jakin, bihar ere zuekin izango garela hemen, Victoria Eugenia Antzokian, arratsaldeko 6-etatik aurrera.
Juan Ignacio Zirak, Sandra Díaz eta Didier Keloz izango dira gure biharko gonbidatuak. Eta teknologia kuantikoez, klimaren aldaketaz eta astrofisikaz arituko zaizkigu.
Muchísimas gracias por venir, les esperamos mañana.
Biharte.